Welcome. Thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode until the question-and-answer session of today's conference. At that time, you may press star, then the number 1 on your phone to ask a question. I'd like to inform all parties that today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the conference over to Irene Spricky. You may begin.
Great, and welcome everybody to our Finex webinar today. I'm very excited about our topic. We will be discussing light touch financial education on credit card debt and discussing some research the Bureau has done and some tools we have. And we also are very excited to have a guest speaker today, Sanay Mohammed from Qualified Credit Counseling Agency in Philadelphia. So it's going to be a great webinar. Just to start off, our standard disclaimer that this presentation does not constitute legal interpretation, guidance, or advice from the CFPB, and we're also not affiliated or endorsing any of the speakers or entities on the call. So we just want to put that there up front. So what I always do on Finex webinars, especially a welcome to people who are already part of Finex and don't get the communications at this point, I just do a couple minutes of overview to get on the same page. We are with the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is the newest federal agency. We work to help consumer finance markets work better by making rules more effective, consistent, and fairly enforcing those rules, and empowering consumers to take more control over their economic lives. The Office of Financial Education are really focused in particular on that first bullet up there, educate, which is helping consumers to be better prepared to be the first line of defense against abusive financial practices. And the CFPB, there's a consumer-facing side, consumer education and engagement, with a number of offices that serve special populations such as trade service members, older Americans, and others. Here in the Office of Financial Education, we kind of look across the whole population and try to help educate and empower consumers to make better informed decisions. And one of the ways that we want to do that is to help the financial education field, all the people out there like all of you who are helping consumers to navigate their financial lives, to get tools and resources that we hope will be useful to you. And so the CFPB Financial Education Exchange, or Finex, is kind of communication mechanism where we get our information out to you through things like this webinar, our newsletters, things like that. We learn back from you through occasional surveys or convenings that we do, and encourage all of you to connect with each other through our LinkedIn group or through other times when we all come together in different ways. So anybody on this call is not part of Finex, meaning you're not getting like a monthly newsletter with updates specifically about Finex. You can sign up by sending an email to CFPB_Finex, Finex, @cfpb.gov. And we'll up again later, too. So if you want to continue to learn about things like this webinar, do sign up and you will get an occasional newsletter to let you know what's coming up. As I mentioned, we've done a number of things. This is actually our 21st webinar, and they are almost all available on our website if anybody wants to listen to previous webinars. Statistics up there about regional convenings and number of people in Finex right now, which is a little over 2,200. So we're excited that it has expanded. And we have an inventory of our different tools and resources online, and so a resources for financial educators webpage. The URL for that is consumerfinance.gov/adult-financial-education. Not the most elegant of URLs, but that's what we got right now. So all the things we talk about today, you will be able to see on that website. And just lastly, we have a financial education discussion group on LinkedIn. There's information about that on our website as well, but it's a way for you all to both see new things from us, which you also get in the Finex newsletter, but also to be able to post your own questions, thoughts, resources that you have. Okay. Before we jump into our topic for the day, I want to do a quick plug for our February webinar, which we already have scheduled, which was on the fourth Thursday, February 23rd at 2 o'clock Eastern. That will look at debt collection. Today we're looking at sort of managing credit card spending and debt. Next month is looking at debt collection and some new research and resources the CFPB has on helping people and consumers debt collection challenges, including some very interesting video stories of consumers who have shared their kind of struggles with us. And so I think that will be a very interesting webinar. More information on that, of course, will come through our newsletter, as well as on our LinkedIn site and on our website. That background, we can now go on to our topic of the day, light touch financial education on credit card debt. So we will hear from my colleague here at CFPB, Sue Kerbel. I'll turn it over to her in a second. After her, we will then hear from Sanai Mohammed from Clarify. And just quickly, if anyone has questions during the presentation, you can use the Q&A function on the WebEx if you're a WebEx part, and I will monitor those. If there's anything urgent, I will respond. And then at the end, we will open up for voice questions. So again, we'll hold sort of more, more things being clarifying questions to the very end, but you will have the chance to do that. And with that, I will turn it over to Sue. Thank you very much, Sue.
Great. Thanks very much, Irene. And hi, everybody. It's good to be here, and I'm looking forward to taking the next few minutes to tell you all about our study on rule of thumb for credit card revolvers, also known as light touch financial education and credit card debt, for the purpose of our webinar. So the purpose of our study was to find out if simple messages can change financial behavior. In other words, we wanted to test the effectiveness of rules of thumb. Specifically, we wanted to see if we could help consumers decrease their revolving credit card debt through the use of rules of thumb. Rules of thumb are mental shortcuts that simplify decision-making and produce a good enough solution. So, for example, if you eat a healthy diet, instead of memorizing the entire FDA food pyramid, you could just remember to fill half your plate with veggies. That's a rule of thumb. It's simpler to call, gets you eventually to the same result. Rules of thumb have been shown to work well with repetitive decisions, such as managing revolving credit card debt. And there's been some prior research that shows that financial rules of thumb can work as well or better than more detailed and complex financial education in some situations. Also, very inexpensive. That's with all our research partners we have listed here on the screen, we decided to test some new rules of thumb with American credit card revolvers to see if they're effective enough to add to the financial education toolkit. Now, just to be clear, CFPB's Office of Financial Education commissioned the research. The Urban Institute actually conducted the study with the D2D fund. The data was reviewed by CFPB's Office of Research. The Urban Institute conducted the analysis, so partners involved here. We can't really speak to the details of the data analysis, but our focus today will be much more on the implications of the study. We went through an intensive process to create these two new rules. There have been insights in the literature, 7 months of iterative, in-depth consumer interviews, 4 straw man rules. All of that ultimately became 2 original rule statements. 1, don't skip the small stuff. Use cash when it's under $20. And 2, credit keeps charging. It adds about 20% to the total. So basically for Rule 1, reduce unconscious credit spending on small items. And 2, for Rule 2, be aware of the cost of credit. And what you see here on the screen are the web banners, email ads, and fridge calendar magnets containing the rules. We did a random trial with a large sample of about 14,000 credit card revolvers from Arizona Federal Credit Union. We assigned participants to either get one of the 2 rules or be in the control group. The condition got no messages beyond what they typically would have gotten anyway from Arizona Federal. They were all randomly assigned to get their rule through at least one of 3 delivery channels. There were web portal banners on their account login page, emails up to twice per month, a mail refrigerator magnet as well with the rule statement printed on it. So just to clarify, we tested every combination of treatment condition and delivery channels. We tested Rule 1 with every combination of delivery channel, Rule 2 with every combination of delivery channel, that email, web portal, calendar magnet, and then there's a control group as well. We delivered the messages, I should say, during the first 6 months of 2015. We got great quality de-identified account data from Arizona Federal credit, checking, and savings accounts, plus credit reporting data. And here's what we found. First, about the sample. These had fairly stable financial lives, as you can see. They had about $5,000 in parked debt. They were infrequent card users and had infrequent card purchases under $20. So not really pay down debt, spending on their card, minimal small purchases on their card. Because of this, we can expect an upper limit on the effects that we would expect to see with these rules, and yet we have an effect. Revolvers exposed to one of the rule statements, that cash or $20 rule, should on average a 2% lower credit card balance on the Arizona federal card compared with revolvers who were not exposed to the rules. When revolvers saw the cash under $20 rule, their card balances were on average $104 lower than the balances they had prior to being able to see the message. That's a fact, but it was statistically significant, which is good news. On the end, why we get this result is unclear. We did not find any significant changes in any aspect of credit card purchases or payments, which seems like a paradox. Typically, we expect to see fewer purchases or payments, or both. We found neither. We also found no detectable effect on savings, withdrawals, on deposits, or a number of debit card transactions below $20. And we found evidence that revolvers substituted the use of one credit card for another card outside of Arizona Federal. For example, we found no effect on their aggregate debt on all revolving trades, which includes debt from accounts outside of Arizona Fed. So overall, we found lower card balances, good news, but it's unclear why. Most interesting of all, we found a greater effect for revolvers age 40 and under. For revolvers, exposure to either rule led to an average 5% reduction in credit card balance compared to their control counterparts. That's about $170 less with that cash under $20 rule on average. Average decrease of about $160 for that adds 20% rule. Who saw the adds 20% rule also showed an average of $20 less in card purchase amount compared to counterparts in the control group. A minor decrease in credit card purchases is not nearly large enough to account for the average balance decrease we saw for this group. But it does suggest that rule exposure led to low balances and, to a small degree, decreased spending among this group. Last, compared to their control group counterparts, the under 40 group who were exposed to the cash under $20, now we're talking about the other rule, they showed an average increase of about $280 in savings, as well as an increase in net savings of about $180. That's their savings balance minus their credit card balance. That's a substantial gain in net savings for this younger group, although it's not entirely clear why that's the case or what factors might explain that increased net savings for this younger group. It is conceivable, for example, there might have been cash or account activity that occurred outside the participants' Arizona Federal accounts, which was not detectable in credit history. In the event, overall, for that 40-year group, the rule did have a greater effect on card balances primarily, along to some degree, slightly lower purchase amounts with the one rule and more savings with the other rule. We found no significant effects for delivery channel. There was no difference in impact if participants saw rules via email, web banner, or fridge magnet, although fewer channels were better. Card balance was reduced with one or two, but not 3 channels. 3 channels might be too many. On the other hand, email open rates were very high during the study, indicating lots of interest in the topic of card reduction. The overall average email open rate over the course of the 6-month study was 31%. That was what you might typically expect for a study like this, an open rate of about maybe 15 or 20%. We had a spike in month 1 with both rules, up to 46% and 58% of email opened. And then month 3, open rates spiked again, the neighborhood of 45 to 60% when we sent emails with the subject line, avoid unnecessary credit costs. So extremely high open rates. And by the end of the 6 months, open rates had tapered to 18 and 22%, which is still very good. So all of this together indicating very strong interest in card debt reduction. And also keep in mind that rules of thumb are a very cost-effective intervention. Production delivery of rule messages costs less than $1 per person, as you can see. It's virtually no marginal cost to bring to scale. Interestingly enough, the rule statements worked even under a very low motivation scenario. There's every reason to think that participants would ignore this tiny handful of rule statements. No motivators in place to get participants to follow through, no commitment devices or incentives, for example, and yet, even under those circumstances, the statements got results. That speaks to the power of rules of thumb and financial education intervention. So now, there is an error there. Rules of thumb can create behavior change. they can have an impact on credit card behavior. These particular rules may be just a test case, but the concept holds water. In other words, we may be able to say exactly what mechanism caused the rules to lead to decreased card balances. But the fact that we found a statistically significant result from a randomized control trial, even a modest result like we got here, means that those rule messages caused the effect we observed. And all the evidence taken together seems to suggest that we very quickly got the effect we did, at least in part, due to bringing the topic to mind. So paying attention and using reminders, even in a minimal way, make a difference in ring card balances. It's important because this is one more piece of evidence to support the perspective that there are many ways to do effective financial education. A simple, low-cost tool like this can help people carry less debt without having to learn lots of new information. Also speak to the value of customizing rules of thumb to the particular consumers that use them. Our under 40 group, for example, responded differently than others to the rules. The lesson here is to create rules of thumb that fit the circumstances of specific consumers or types of consumers, along with encouragement to do more research to further our understanding of why rules of thumb work and for whom and under what conditions. On this point, in September, the Institute released their full research report on our study, and D2D, who are now known as Commonwealth, they released their own product, a design toolkit on how to create a rule of thumb. Both of them are available on their websites. And just last week, CFPB released 3 things: a research brief reviewing the research results, as well as a digest for financial educators with suggestions on ways to make use of the findings, and number 3, a worksheet for consumers on how to create personalized rules of thumb, all of this based on the results of the study. In fact, we're going to give you a little preview here of those 2 last items. So here's our digest for financial educators on credit card rules of thumb. The digest will help you understand some of the practical implications of the study. It's available on our Adult FinEd webpage. As you can see, the URL address at the bottom of the slide right there. Again, just as a preview, here are some of the suggestions you'll find in the digest on what you can do to make use of our study findings. First, you may want to start by sharing our credit card rules to live by with your clients, but just as a starting place for helping them to create rules that fit their personal circumstances. I'd encourage you to also use our worksheet for this, which I'll show you in a moment.
And just for all those who are watching the WebEx, my apologies, the typeface is a little odd on this slide. I swear it didn't look like that when we uploaded it, but if you read it that well, we can email this to you afterwards. Certainly. Sorry to jump in there.
No worries. It's also encouragement to go and look at the actual digest, which will have all this information very clearly printed out for you. So
it's clear. It's just the typefaces are unusually sized, which is something not fun with the formatting.
This happens. So in any case, just to reiterate, encouraging folks to start by sharing the credit card rules to live by with your clients as a starting place. Then next, after they've crafted their rule that fits their personal circumstances, to help consumers to find ways to keep attention focused on their personalized rule of thumb. That's important. And what that means is basically making sure it's reliably visible without bombarding them. So calendar reminders, account alerts, well-placed Post-it notes like on the fridge that can help. Phone apps are also good sources of reminders as well. And then lastly, more broadly, you might want to consider ways to focus consumer attention on their credit cards, particularly for those who are struggling with getting a handle on their credit card debt. It could be helpful to remind them that small purchases add up, or of the cost of carrying a balance. And again, we found that at least in part, card balances decreased, especially for those younger consumers, simply because of the act of bringing attention repeatedly to the topic of charging small purchases, the cost of using credit cards. So harnessing that insight, even outside of a formal rule of thumb, might be useful. Lastly, here's our credit card rule to live by worksheet that I just mentioned. So the idea is to start with the rules, say, don't swipe the small stuff. So you would help the person, especially that person who's struggling to control their card debt, you'd help that person figure out when and where they are swiping the small stuff. In other words, go over that card statement with them. Help them identify when and where they put small purchases on the card when they might have paid cash instead. And in that last step, help them modify the rule to fit the goals that person has in mind for saving and credit card management, and also accounting for the person's financial limitations that they're working with. And so, for example, use cash under $20 might turn out to be, I'll pay cash for my coffee every morning for this person once you've customized the rule. Like with the rule, you're going to want to keep the rule simple and concrete so it's easy to act on so the person can remember it. And from there, again, you want to keep their attention focused on the rule with regular but unobtrusive reminders. That means posting it in a spot where they'll easily see it on a regular basis. The worksheet is going to walk you through all of how to do this step by step. And again, it's available on our Adult FinEd webpage on CFPB.gov.
And there's a screenshot you're looking at. It's a little hard to read because, of course, it's small on the screen. But again, you can access that. It's part of a series of our Rules to Live by worksheets. There are now 4 of them. This one on credit card spending. Previous ones are on checking your credit report, savings, and sort of budgeting, loosely speaking, to decide how much you can afford to spend each month. So those are all, again, available on the website. You'll see these all again at the end. Okay.
I'm going to hand it over to Sanaya. And
great. Well, thank you, Sue. That was wonderful. Just to know, some of you have been emailing asking if you can get a copy of the PowerPoint deck, and you can. If you could just email, don't email me through the chat function if you've done that, but once we hang up, I will lose that. So if you could email the Finex inbox, which is, again, CFPB_Finex, F-I-N-E-X, CFPB.gov, and just say you want a copy of the PowerPoint, we can send that out to you. Also, my apologies to the several people who have phone numbers sent to me with one digit incorrect, and thank you to the person who caught that. I hope everybody is now on. And if you got on late and missed anything, it is recorded, so you can hear all of it in about a week or so. It will get posted. Okay, so I am now thrilled to turn it over to our guest speaker today, Naye Mohammed from Clarify, and she is going to talk a little bit about her own experience working with folks who have credit card debt and trying to figure out how to manage their credit card spending. So I'll turn it over to you, Naye. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Irene. I really appreciate this opportunity. So I wanted to start by, I'll tell you a little bit about Clarify, what we do, and then how we think about conversations with folks who we touch, both in the low to moderate income population and those outside of that realm. So next slide. Our mission is this. We could hope by helping people really get a handle on what is the most important asset in their life and keeping it with them. And not every asset you want with you for every year of your life, right? What you wanted when you were 15 may be something that you wanted now. And so we accomplish this mission in 2 ways. Next slide. Education programs and counseling programs, and we distinguish those between a group setting, which is education, and counseling programs, which are private one-on-one sessions, or one counselor to a household. So that might be a couple. We began as a nonprofit and continue to be. Last year, we celebrated our 50-year anniversary. We were started as a consumer credit counseling service of Delaware Valley, and we changed our name about 3 years ago to become Clarify, because our programs, both from the counseling and education perspective, have grown in size in terms of what we talk about and what we do and how we do it. So our education programs are fairly simple. There's adults, old teens. So while we're in K through 12, we kind of limit that work to really marginalized teens, LGBT youth, youth aging out of foster care, things like that. Financially Hers is our women-focused programs, and then seniors for the 62 and older. Our thing programs, we talk about budgeting, getting a saving for the first time, preparing for homeownership, avoiding foreclosure, managing student loan debt. Those are things that we work on. And so we're talking to a lower income household about retirement and getting their arms around that, and providing a financial checkup, folks who are thinking about approaching their overwhelming amount of credit card debt, try and have a whole robust conversation that intersects with many different aspects of people's lives. We're a member agency of the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, and we are HUD-approved a housing counseling agency as well. And so when, next slide. So Irene approached us and asked us about this study. We're happy to weigh in from our perspective. More work is focused on low to moderate income households throughout the greater Delaware Valley, which includes Philadelphia, its surrounding counties, southern New Jersey, and northern Delaware. And with respect to my populations, experience suggests that, folks in the LMI population use credit cards as a way to establish credit, if not altogether improve credit. And so tend to focus on establishing credit for the first time with a secured card, and we direct them, encourage them to look at secured cards as opposed to subprime credit that they might see at a store card or a pre-approved offer mailed to their home, given their current credit score profile. So from this perspective, in terms of establishing credit, what we find is that oftentimes households are reluctant to use credit or to establish credit in the first place, come to us unaware how important credit can be or not understanding the rules. And so on the education side, our most very requested workshop is in fact the credit report workshop, because people don't understand credit, particularly when you're dealing with low to moderate income households. And so they're reluctant to use credit. They don't understand it. And so having a credit card for the small purchases is what we encourage them to think about. Go to a local drugstore, maybe run your credit card for a $4 purchase. That does a couple of things. One, it keeps the credit line open for those larger purchases that might come down the pike to finance the financial shock that might happen from a car repair or things of that nature. So $4 purchase gets them on the board in terms of establishing credit. It also is a way in which they can sort of manage through repaying that, which we know is critical to establishing credit or improving credit. So the repayment is also something they can manage as opposed to the larger purchase that the study addressed. So when it comes to the LMI population, the $20 cash rule that we really encourage people to think about is actually to conserve that credit line to be open for the larger emergency. You're going to want to use the credit card for smaller purchases because it's easy when you have a very low income to make a $4 repayment. Because a lot of them already are reluctant to use credit, they kind of already have the discipline on which you can build about using credit selectively, again, only for those larger purchases. And then, of course, we encourage them to consider if they're able to make more than the minimum payment as opposed to the 20% rule that was discussed in this study. So minimum payments are easier, of course, when you've got a balance of $20, so that makes it more of a accessible tool. So so that's how we approach the rules of thumb with respect to the LMI population. Next slide. One with non-LMI populations, those folks tend to come to us because they may have overindulged in credit card usage for one reason or another, and so when they come to us for our debt management plans, then we encourage them to keep one credit card open for large emergency purchases only. So do not use cards for small purchases and only for true emergencies. That's how they're directed. So it just depends on the audience that reaches and sort of where they are and their financial lives is sort of how we kind of attack this. So next slide, I'll just kind of conclude here. So I think the overarching factor is yes to these rules of thumb. And if you've ever done improv at all, that's sort of my background from a performing arts background. Yes, and you want to think about your audience. So if your audience is LMI and are using credit cards for the very first time, you might want to adjust the rules of thumb here to encourage that they use the credit card for smaller purchases from which they can recover and repay. For the non-LMI populations, you might want to think about having them understand the importance of credit for those larger emergencies, so they can recover from credit card overindulgence and using them way too often and getting into a whole heck of a lot of problems. So yes, and also keep those two things into consideration. That's sort of how our work informs these two rules. and I'll get there.
Great. Well, thank you, and I want you to know that I'd love to talk to you about exploring financial education through improv theater. Maybe a more engaging way to get to clients to come to all of the programs that you guys have.
Yeah.
That's terrific. So, let me just quickly let the operator give instructions for how to ask voice questions. You can also continue to send things through Q&A. So let the operator do that, and then I'll ask a couple questions to Sinai myself.
Thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session over the phone. If you would like to ask a question, please press *1, unmute your phone, and record your name clearly. Your name is required to introduce your question. If you need to withdraw that question, press *2. Again, to ask a question, please press *1, and it may take a few moments for those questions to come through. Please stand by.
Great. I've been saying that there's agreement on the idea of improv for Finex, so thank you for chiming in there. So Sinai, I love your the message you gave us really built so nicely on, I think, what our rules of our financial guidelines or rules of thumb work, both this project and previous ones we've talked about, that there's general guidelines that people hear about and know about and, hear from each other and from the media and from books and then they need to be customized a little bit, or at least tweaked to fit the particular circumstance. And I think it was very interesting how particular moderate income populations who may be struggling more with getting access to credit as opposed to just managing spending through credit may in fact have the reverse rule of thumb, which is spend only under 20, or use your credit card only for situations under $20. So that is very intriguing. And I would love to actually also hear from people on the phone if they have observations in that regard as well. Let me see. We've got a couple of questions already. Thank you. Let me get this one open. How about this? First question we've gotten, and then I'll ask about voice questions in a minute. Again, *1 if you want to ask a voice question. Would agree that the trend is towards digital transactions, and if so, how does this fit into the don't sweat the small stuff strategy? Sue.
Question. Yes, it does seem the trend is in the direction of more digital transactions, and I would say that well, in the study, we didn't distinguish between cash and debit, and we didn't find any results that distinguish between that. And so technically, you could still approach not swiping and instead using debit rather than credit cards. That's one possible way of thinking about it. But I think the larger question is in terms of physical cash versus digital. And I think, yes, there's a limitation of what we're recommending, and we are in some sense sensitized, but when you're asking people to develop a new discipline, that's not completely unrealistic. So
yeah. Add to that too, there are definitely folks who feel might make a different choice about that spending activity if they're pulling out cold hard cash out of their pockets, right? So for some folks, the quote-unquote old school method of the envelope method works for them because they're hard to part with real cash, but they're easier to make the swipe. So, in terms of moving towards digital cash with respect to debit cards and whatnot to take the place of the credit card expense, there's something to note on there as well.
And this is, I would just note, we didn't say too much about the original genesis of this, but there's research showing that people spend more when they use a credit card than when they use cash, because there's this pain of paying idea. It came up earlier, and so that is reality for some people, but maybe not for everybody. There's also obviously issues around people needing to think about security and all that when they're carrying cash versus credit. I think the bigger message is not necessarily don't swipe the small stuff, the exact right rule of thumb, but the idea is, if people want to keep better track of their spending and manage their spending, what are ways they can set up guidelines that work for them, for their particular needs, concerns, comfort with cash versus credit. And so whether or not it's these particular rules, the idea is, can you all work with your clients to say how managing spending and keeping debt down is one of your priorities, one of your goals, how to do it. Maybe it's getting balance alerts every day so you're aware of how much alerts from your credit card. Maybe that helps you. Maybe you don't need to switch to cash, but you are aware. Maybe you set a dollar amount to spend per day and find a way to keep track of it. So there's any number of ways you could apply the general idea of help people develop some type of rule or guideline that works for their particular goal in their particular situation, and then figure out how to implement it, which is sort of the behind the worksheet that is part of this suite of materials that we are sharing. So that's true. You know, in a world that's all digital, maybe less about cash, but the general idea is how do we help people manage that spending. I have some other emailed ones, but let's ask if there's any voice questions that have come in, operator.
We have a couple of questions over the phone line. The first comes from Sandra Lee. Your line is open, ma'am.
Sandra Lee, calling from Helena, Arkansas. We are just getting into the financial arena as a whole, reaching out to schools and community groups and organizations. And clarify, I understand, I came on the call late, but it said you've been in business 50 years?
1966, I was a wee girl. I'm just kidding. Yeah.
Do you mind sharing with me your sustainability access to funds?
What do you mean by that? You have quite a diverse amount of funding that relies on earned income, grants, partnerships, and federal funding as well.
Okay.
Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Federal funds?
Yes, that's a part of it, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Writing that down. Thank you.
Great. Operator, other voice calls?
Yes, one other question on the line. Jillian Moore, your line is open.
Killian from Raleigh, North Carolina, and we do a lot of presentations with from like middle school all the way up to adults, and I wanted to know if you guys had any tips about speak to like the younger crowd, like school and high schoolers regarding credit cards, because they do have a lot of questions regarding them, and even though, of course, they aren't able to get them, but some are starting to get ready for college, and they have those questions. And to know if you had any tips.
And so now you have a program for younger people, right? Do you want to address that?
Yeah, sure. So the way in which we have worked with youth is that we have a script in terms of what we're going to talk about. It's not really a script. Again, that's a throwback for me. But we have a program that we're planning on delivering. But we just come with information and just ask them to ask us questions and take an improvisational approach and get away from that today and just kind of play to their or let them lead how the conversation will go. One thing we always have in our back pockets is it's a quick game. We come with sort of, and it's been done before. It's not something that we invented, of course, but it's, you get you pair the students in groups of, 3, 4, or 5, whatever you've got there, and folks we give them a person that the group becomes, and then we have life circumstances sort of thrown at them, and they have to manage their financial lives when their car breaks down, when they have a different job. We have the students sometimes even bid on job opportunities or life opportunities based upon a finite amount of income. And we also vary. One person gets $1,000, one person gets $100, and help them understand the scarcity of income and how that can affect their choices. So I would say particularly with the younger groups, but also with adults as well. I'm sure you know, as much as you can vary it up and also just be directly responsive to the questions they have, and then building from there the true workshop. But we rarely come in with a set script. We're able to do that if we need to and we don't get enough questions, but you let them sort of set the agenda.
Perfect. Thank you.
This is Irene with CFPB. We also have a number of materials on youth financial capability, youth financial education. There's actually a parallel page to the adult financial education page that we've mentioned a number of times, consumerfinance.gov/youth-financial-education. That you can get on our website that has some resources, things on helping get financial education into school systems. But it does have in particular, a paper called Building Blocks. It's got a longer title than that, but discussing the different skills and abilities and things you can teach kids at different ages based on their developmental readiness. So for young kids, middle grade kids, and more high school age kids. So that's something you might want to look at. It's not explicitly about how to talk about credit cards, but there may be things in there that might be useful for you. So I encourage you to at least take a look at that and see if that might be of use. Actually, interestingly, on the other end of the spectrum, we have had 2 questions come in via the Q&A function here, asking about, I think really aimed at today, asking to please say more about credit card use and senior citizens, because some folks are seeing senior consumers. And so now I know you mentioned you had a program for that. Would you like to tell us about that?
Yeah, we have a senior program that I had mentioned that speaks with folks 62 and older, and we as a part of that grant, it's focused in Philadelphia and then the surrounding counties, also a little bit in southern New Jersey. And so I would say routinely when we deal with seniors, actually we don't talk a lot about credit card debt because that's not what they're asking for. They're asking for things around identity theft. They're asking for information about reverse mortgages, asking for information that we have put together that helps them understand end-of-life planning with a financial perspective. So those are the types of things that we routinely see. Oftentimes, the seniors that we interact with are much older, older than 62. They're in their late 70s to 80s. We do have programming for 62 and younger, and that is really about, and those sort of, I wouldn't even call them seniors, but older adults, maybe from the 50 to 62 range. That's would fall into our general adult programming. Those types of questions people have around managing their debt, that's when it's all questions about how I repay the debt, how do I get out of so much debt that I have, and that is when we typically take the approach about reducing how much you spend, understanding the power of minimum payments into eradicating that debt, and helping them understand preliminarily if they would, if a DMP would make sense for them. But it's really managing existing debt loads as opposed to reducing their spending, because when we have an adult who is interested in our credit card workshop, it's usually about reducing their existing balances, not about how do I stop spending around the budgeting element, and that's a different workshop altogether. I hope that makes sense.
All right. There's one other email question in here. Oop, another one just came in, and then I'll turn again to the voice questions. Again, *1 if you want to ask a voice question. We have a question: is CFPB planning to test other rules of thumb related to credit or other areas of personal finance, such as savings?
Another very good question. We don't have any specific plans to test to other randomized control trial on rules of thumb. That having been said, I think one of the outcomes of this particular study is encouraging the field as a whole to take what's done here, to Irene's earlier point, as proof of concept, as sort of a stake in the ground to show that rules of thumb are effective. And then from there, I think we're happy to hand the standing over to others to do other studies to show why do these work and with whom and under what circumstances. So it's a way of saying no, not right now, but we'd love to see more research.
And actually a related question just came in, which the answer will be the same, but I'll share it. Are there any specific thoughts related to creating rule of thumb for our service members? We actually do have a lot of service members serving financial educators who are part of Finex, our Office of Service Members, which works a lot with that group of folks. Again, we don't have anything pending now, but I think I'd love to hear either now or certainly through additional conversations and email exchanges with all of you on what type of rules of thumb you think would work for your populations. Do you have a sense? Educators, you will have a better sense, certainly very often than we would, about what you think works with folks you know. What are people you know actually doing? What are consumers doing that seems to be working? So we, I think, would love to hear that type of feedback.
I would add that I think we have interest in creating more worksheets. So yes. For eventually it would be great to have a whole compendium of worksheets on every possible kind of financial decision making. So as things come along, I think we will be able to create more and more of those. And so So yeah, again, we'd be interested in hearing. And
right, and I mean specifically rules to live by worksheets.
Yes.
We have tried the term rules to live by. We have used a way to say rules of thumb customized to you. our special term for that. And again, we have 4 right now. The one on credit spending, which we've just kind of been talking about, along with one on checking your credit report, one on setting savings for individual, and one on budget and spending. And I think hopefully we'll have more, but we also love ideas on what other topics would be helpful.
Definitely.
Someone emailed, I recommend a rule of thumb for student loans before someone agrees to a student loan. I love that. That is excellent. I'll ask our Office of Students about that. Are there other voice questions?
We do have one question over the phone.
Great.
Your line is open.
What would be the best way to lower the high percentage rates on these cards?
In terms of what decisions or choices a consumer could make, as opposed to. You say, do you would probably know that better from your work, kind of in practice with folks who have credit cards. Could you take a crack at that?
Yeah. So debt management plans can be a tool that consumer credit counseling agencies throughout the country can use to help people reduce their outstanding credit card debt, fees, and sometimes interest rates as well. So, for instance, able to negotiate credit card interest rates, sometimes in the case all the way down to 2%. It just really depends on the nature of the agreement, the hardship the consumer is facing, and so on and so forth. So would connect with the local consumer credit counseling agency in your area to see what access to debt management plans might be available to help your constituents.
Thank you.
And it ever work for someone without the kind of infrastructure of a debt management plan to call on their own and ask for a lower rate?
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes people who don't qualify for a DMP, and they haven't already gone to the creditor, we encourage them to go back and seek some help one-on-one, and that means they lose access to that credit card in the future. They might close that credit card and still have to repay that balance, but at least there is a window of opportunity of getting out of debt with a lower interest rate negotiated directly with the creditor. That does happen sometimes.
This is actually one more question here. It's a throwback to our youth financial capability that we were talking about. I think this is aimed actually at Sanaya as well. But do you partner with other nonprofits such as Junior Achievement with regard to working with early education is the term that this person uses? Do you have partnerships, organizations you work with in that area?
Yes, we do. Our focus for youth education, I oftentimes refer them to other organizations who serve the K-12 market specifically. Being a nonprofit, we all know that we have limited resources, so we just can't be in as many places as we want to be. So we do have referral relationships for folks who have interest in the K-12 space, but everything we do is partnership-based. The education and on the counseling side, we embed our offices with social service organizations. And then likewise, on the education side, we always work in partnership with organizations. So that's a critical way in which we get the message out there and connect with clients.
Great. I'm going to ask in just a minute for a last round of anyone interested in voice questions, *1 for that. But I want to say just briefly, again, for those who wanted the PowerPoint, and actually, if anyone's looking at the screen, I've just gone to a resources page, a very last slide that just has the CFPB Finex email address along with the website we've been talking about. If you want the slides, if you could email me at CFPB Finex, C_Finex at CFPB.gov. A few of you have emailed through the Q&A, but I have not been able to write those down because I'm trying to keep up with questions, and so if you could send that to the Finex box, because once we turn this WebEx off, I lose those questions forever and know who asked for it. Again, we can email you the PowerPoint. Also, again, anyone on the phone who isn't signed up for Finex and wants to get a monthly newsletter on our newest things, if you could send an email again to CFPB_Finex at CFP.gov. And then just again to note that this webinar, we have recorded it. It will be up in a couple weeks on the Adult Financial Education page. We also have a sort of a library of all our previous webinars, and I will note that there have been a number of you have been interested in seniors and young people. There have been several in the past. Dealing with those topics, if you want to look at those or listen to those, there's one on the blocks for youth to help youth build financial capability, again on the different development stages of kids and what are appropriate kind of financial education-related activities or skills you can build. One on a review tool to look at curriculums for kids and young people. Choose a good one. A couple other things like that on K-12, and then there are a number of resources. We have an Office of Older Americans. There's a number of resources for seniors around different financial decisions on our website. And again, we've had webinars on 3 or 4 of those. So if you look through the webinar archive at the bottom of the resources for financial educators page, you'll see a number of webinars and links and things. So again, just want to make sure everybody knows about all of those resources. Let me ask again, are there any, operator, any final voice questions that have come in?
Yeah, I have one. I believe she said her name was Anisha. Your line is open.
Anisha from Everfi out in DC. One of the questions that we often ask ourselves, and I'm going to ask you if you have any answers or any research based on what are the gaps that you're seeing in financial education from the consumers, and what is it that they're looking to learn, and how are they consuming that? Are there any best practices around how we present this information to them? Thank you.
Wow. You're going, wow, because that is an enormous question. That is almost the way you've just very clearly articulated our mission.
Right.
We want to answer those gaps and have research supported to address each of them. It's almost too big a question to give a good answer.
I'll note we have something that'll be coming out soon, and it's somewhat public already, which is why we're able to talk about it. We talked about it at a Finex conference that a number of you probably were at or called into last September. We have 5 principles to support financial well-being or effective financial education, which kind of get at the best practices. And those are going to be released fairly soon. And in fact, I think if anyone in the conference had those in a way that we could share. But they're kind of broader principles on how to do financial education and help consumers move towards behavior change. We could share. In fact, if you want to email the Finex box, I could send you something on that. Those will be coming out soon. We will have a webinar on those once they're out. This is what we hear from consumers. So you may have a better sense of what people come and say they want to know about. Certainly what we hear from the field is they want to know about just about everything, but generally a lot of day-to-day money management or things are often some are more compelling in the immediate moment perhaps than longer-term goals, depending on the type of program you're running. So if you're running a counseling program where people come in with issues, it's probably going to be around debt or credit. If you're doing a program looking at longer-term things like home ownership, or you may have people coming in, if you're marketing that way. It kind of depends on what you're trying to do and teach. So do you want to chime in any way on your experiences and clarify? You probably are seeing people with a lot of credit issues since you're a credit counseling agency, but I know your purview is so much broader now than probably in earlier days.
Yeah. So, huge question, right? I think in terms of the questions people routinely ask for, it's budgeting, but budgeting that's accessible. So most people, especially if they've never budgeted before, are scared, and so they're scared into immobility around starting to budget for the first time by tracking everything they spend. They're not going to do that, and so we want to change the way we talk about budgeting and holding just to a couple of key principles. Talk about budgeting in some different ways. We talk about credit. We talk about debt collection because it always comes up when we talk about credit. We talk about people who are exiting bankruptcy. So on their brain is about, how do I responsibly enter back into the credit arena after going through bankruptcy? Our homeowners who have experienced foreclosure or who've gone through a modification are very weary about that same types of questions. So we have those are the types of things they're interested in. And now that they have been bruised and battered, how do they re-enter this arena, which it's just such every aspect of their life. People want to understand their paychecks. They want to understand Social Security. They want to understand reverse mortgage. People want to understand credit. People want to understand also about their student loans. They're overwhelmed and they're just seeking resources. What I found to be most interesting for us, we started doing financial planning. So we do retirement coaching. We have chartered retirement planning counselors on staff, and the who are coming to see us already have a financial advisor. They all are saving for their retirement, and they're usually in their 50s or so. They're just coming in to just get in, but they are okay because we don't sell product. We don't pitch product. That's not who we are. They just want someone else to look over their financials and give them reassurance if that is in fact what they truly have presented themselves to just need reassured. So people are looking for a whole host of information, but ultimately they want to know they're doing okay.
Exhaustive list of of things that people want to know about. Again, really relating the need, I think, for all the work that all of you guys are doing out in your community. So we're right at the top of the hour, so I think we will close up here. I got one nice last little, not a question, but a comment saying I truly enjoyed the non-cookie cutter approach to working with clients that we were talking about too. So that's a way to end. I think that the idea is people need guidelines and rules that they set for themselves that really work for needs, and obviously credit card spending is a big one that a lot of people want, want help with in different ways. So thank you very much, Sue, for speaking. Thank you very much today for being our guest speaker. Love that. And thanks everyone for for joining us today. Email if you have any questions to the Finex inbox or want the PowerPoint. And thank you very much. We are done.
That concludes today's conference. Thank you for participating. You may disconnect at this time.